Hey everyone, Azim here. We are in chapter 8, the appendicular skeleton, starting on slide 6. We'll be talking about the humerus and the radius and ulna, the largest bones, longest bones of the arm. Humerus, not Humerous. It's not funny per se, but yeah, humerus, just the US. Humerus is the arm bone of your brachial region. It has a head region on the proximal side, pointing medially. On the distal end, it has a bunch of processes. We'll learn of these epicondyles and trochleas on the other end that help articulate at the elbow joint, the humeroradial ulnar joint. There's a sharp, rounded protrusion on the medial side called the trochlea. There's a sharp, rounded protrusion called the trochlea on the medial distal side. The word trochlea means pulley. If you're familiar with pulleys, a pulley involves a wheel or rounded feature of some kind, and then you pull something over it like a rope, and you can pull on that thing, and it makes it easier to pull than if you just dragged it over something that wasn't round. Pulleys make things easier to pull with leverage, to turn something with leverage on a hinge or on a wheel. The humerus then has this trochlea so that we can bend our elbow easily. This trochlea interacts with the ulna. The Olecranon process of the ulna also fits in on the posterior side with this Olecranon fossa. So the Olecranon process is a sharp part of our elbow. When we straighten our elbow out, when we extend our humeroradial ulnar joint, it has to fit in somewhere. There's a shallow portion on the posterior side of our humerus, the Olecranon fossa. We'll look at this in complete anatomy in a second, once we look at the radius and ulna. These two go together because they're kind of like complements of one another. They are both in the antebrachial region. They articulate with each other, and they articulate with the humerus at the proximal end. At the distal end, they articulate with different carpal bones. They together allow for a special movement called pronation and supination. Pronation and supination is when pronation is when you turn your palm down. Supination is when you turn your palm up. Pronation, supination. Feel your radius and ulna turning over when you do that. To allow for this kind of movement, the radius needs to be round. The head of the radius is a nice round structure, and it can roll over. Similarly, the head of the ulna, it's not as round, but we can get a twisting over at this point. If I haven't made this clear, the radius is more lateral of the two. In anatomical position, the radius is lateral. The ulna is medial. The way I remember this is that if you give a thumbs up, the ulna is underneath. The ulna is under. Radius is over here. Radius is thumb side, ulna is pinky side. Several ways you can remember this. What they also both have are sharp points called styloid processes. We saw a styloid process with the temporal bone. Here's an ulnar and a radial styloid process. You have these sharper points on either side, and they articulate with the carpal bones, and you can feel them on your wrists. Here we're at the right humerus on the proximal end. I'm getting really close because I want to show you some features here. The head of the humerus fits in with the glenoid fossa of the scapula. That's a weird parentheses. There. The head of the humerus fits into the glenoid fossa of the scapula. So that's one thing you can find on the proximal end, and the head is always facing medial. The head has to insert into our scapula. On the anterior side, anterior proximal part, you can find this bump. This is called the lesser tubercle. It's a rough protrusion. It's smaller than the other one, which I'll show you. Tubercle. It's an E. Should be an E. Lesser tubercle. Points anteriorly. The bigger one is more points laterally. This is the greater tubercle. These tubercles are attachment points for muscles. When we get to talking about the rotator cuff muscles, we'll see that these rotator cuff muscles attach to these points. On the posterior side, you cannot see the lesser tubercle. Here's a lateral view. Here's the greater, here's the lesser. Posterior view, you can't see the lesser tubercle. So that's why you know if you're not, that's how you know if you're in the posterior view, you can't see it here on the proximal side. On the distal end of the humerus, there's a lot of protrusions. Collectively, on the anterior, well, it's on anterior and posterior, but collectively, what I just colored in pink, that's the condyle. That's the condyle of the humerus. The condyle is made up of a more rounded protrusion that's more lateral. This is called the capitulum. Capitulum means the head shaped. Cap means head. Put a cap on your head. Capital is a head of state. Capitulum. That sharper portion that I mentioned a minute ago, kind of shaped like a wheel, that's the trochlea. The trochlea is more medial. So together, the capitulum and the trochlea make up the condyle on the distal end. This protrusion here, it's on top of the condyle, off to the side of the condyle. It's the epicondyle. It's to the medial side, so this is the medial epicondyle. The medial epicondyle is larger, or points out more, I should say, points out more than the lateral epicondyle. So that's on the proximal end, anterior side. On the other side, on the posterior side, distal end. Oh, here you can see the nice round capitulum. Let me show you that real quick. That's a nice round capitulum from the lateral view. Medial view. Here's the sharper trochlea. posterior view, this is the olecranon process of the ulna. It's your sharp point of your elbow, olecranon process. It fits into this fossa right here. This is a fossa. I'll remove the ulna so that you can see it better. And so that fossa, that's the olecranon fossa of the humerus, to allow the olecranon process, the edge of the olecranon process to fit in when your arm is straightened. Those are features of the humerus and how to identify the different sides, and therefore needing to know those on how to side left versus right humerus. For the ulna, we just saw the olecranon process on the proximal posterior side. For an anterior view, look at how the nice round head of the radius fits in to this notch of the humerus. The ulna. This is called the radial notch. It'll be more apparent if I remove the radius. This is the radial notch. And the head of the radius fits right in there. That's on the lateral proximal end of the ulna. And the head of the radius, of course, is proximal. On the distal side, anterior view, distal side. Right now the radius is highlighted. This protrusion, this lateral protrusion of the radius, that's the radial styloid process. You can kind of see the ulnar styloid process, but it's hiding a bit posteriorly. The ulnar styloid process looks a bit sharper here. Let's look at this from a different angle. From a posterior view, radial styloid process, ulnar styloid process. And they articulate nicely with the carpal bones that you see here, which we'll go over in the next video. I encourage you to watch my other YouTube videos where I go over the siding of these two bones as well as the other bones that we go through here. But knowing which side is proximal versus distal, lateral versus medial. You can, I don't know how well you can see this, but it's a little bit sharper on the anterior sides. Looking for little markings like that, little distinguishing features will help you figure out which side is which. So that is the humerus, radius, and ulna. In the next video, we'll go over the carpal bones and the bones of the hand. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks for watching.